Hi everyone, and welcome to another one of our series of webinars. Today we're going to be talking about an exciting and new part of the platform. Basic concept is to provide on-demand APIs for your apps based on existing assets that you have, like a SQL database. You can turn a SQL query into an actual service that you can then use in a mobile app. But I'll let Max get more into the details about that. So I'm going to hand it over to Max now. He's going to tell you about API Express and then jump into the demo. So take it away, Max.
Thank you, Charlie, and welcome everyone. So let's do a quick overview of API Express, and as Charlie said, we'll actually jump into a demo. API Express, as just a general overview, it does two things really well. It allows you to expose your enterprise data sources, or any data sources within your organization via REST APIs, right? So if the data source you want to use are not exposed via APIs, and it's very simple to use API Express to do that. So again, any data source can be easily exposed via REST API. And second is that you can build offline apps with API Express. Okay, so those are the two main capabilities of API Express today. But let's dive a little bit into this diagram. So first, again, on the right-hand side, right, you've got the data sources. So if you get a SQL database, a SOAP service, it can be an Apri.io cloud database, or it can be an existing REST service, business process, directory service, or in fact, it can be actually any custom data source, right? But today we're going to be using a SQL database in our example, okay? So again, on one side, you're going to connect from API Express, you're going to connect to the SQL database, okay? And then on the other side, you're going to expose a REST API. Now, in many instances, you probably also would like to put authentication, right? You don't want anyone just invoking the API. So there are two ways to do that today, and that's where I see authentication. So you can use the Apri.io database for user management, right? So you can have users in Apri.io database, and then the user would need to be logged in. And I'm referring here to the to your end users who use the app. And then once they log in, they'll be able to invoke the API. Second is you can use a third-party service such as LDAP or also secure LDAP. If you have LDAP running within your organization, you can use that as well. So that's for authentication. Okay, so you create an API. If you want, it can be sort of freely invoked. That's up to you. But probably you want to only authenticate a user to be able to invoke the API, and so you have these options today. Now, in the configuration, so there are actually many different ways you can configure, and what I'm going to show you is that we have a visual flow editor where you basically can build your service. So let me give you an example. So let's say you have two databases, or maybe two tables within the database, right? And you make a request to one database, you make a request to another. Now, you probably don't want to return the entire response back via the API, right? Maybe just not needed. So you would like to do something. Maybe you would like to validate. You would like to do some filtering or combine, right? So that's what you can do in the configuration part. So again, you get data from one table, you get data from another table. You can run some logic on the data and return only the data, the content that's really needed to the client. Okay, so that's very powerful because again, a lot of stuff you can do, a lot of logic you can run, and so on. So I'm going to show you an example of that. So, and as I said, on the other side, it just exposes the REST API. So for the client doesn't know. It's just the REST API, right? So the client doesn't know whether you're invoking an Apri.io database service, whether you're going all the way to a SQL database, or invoking a third-party, vendor API. For the client, it's all the same. All right. So let's now dive into the example. Okay. So let's go click on API Express. And again, I'm going to be using a SQL database in this example. So the first thing to do is we need to create a connection to a database. Now, I already have a connection, and the connection, I'm actually going to open it. And it's very simple. So if you ever use a SQL database, I mean, you've already entered these values. But basically, you create a connection, give it a name. You can select a different type of a database, all right? And you give basically, this is the URL, and then the database name, schema, username, and password. So very standard and very simple stuff, okay? Once you enter this, you can also test and see, right? Now, what I have today is I have a SQL database running on Amazon, okay? And you can see this is the, if I can make this bigger, well, anyhow, this is, you can see here the URL, right? It's running on Amazon, and I have one table. Let me reconnect. All right, so, and let's see, did I lose the connection? Let's do this. Okay. All right. So this is my table. It's very simple, but again, this is a remote database. It's a remote SQL database that's running in the Amazon cloud. So this is my connection is to this database. Okay. So in your case, it would be a connection to your internal database that you have within your organization. Okay. So again, you can create a connection. In fact, you can create any number of connections, and they all would be listed here. Now, once you have a connection, you create an API project, right? And we'll give it a name. So I have a warehouse, and so we'll call this warehouse APIs. And just an example, we have, we have drinks, right? Drinks warehouse API project. Right? The description is optional. Okay, and this is where you get. So this is your API. So what's the very first thing you want to do is you want to click on new model, right? And this allows you to automatically generate the APIs. So I'm going to click new model. Now right here, the name, this is the actual name that's going to go in the API. So you want to go something like warehouse, right? And if you want, you can give it a description. So this is APIs to access the warehouse database. Okay. Next, you select the connection, right? That's the database connection. I only have one. And next, it obviously knows that I have one table, and that's the warehouse table. And then instantly, it shows me the table that I selected. It shows me the columns. Okay, and I can make changes if I want to. I can also write here actions. I can decide which REST actions I would like to generate. Okay, but to keep it very simple, I'm going to keep all the values as is, and I'm going to click Save. And instantly, I generated APIs that talk to the database that I have running on Amazon. Okay? Now, once you generate APIs, you probably want to test them. And that's also very easy to do. You simply click Test. Right? And then up here, you see the different actions, right? The verbs. But let's do find. Let's say we want to display all of them. Now, because we want to display all of them, we're going to delete this data, and we're going to click test. All right, and you can see that I'm getting back the data from my database, SQL database, in JSON format. Right? So this means the service works, and it's very, very simple. Now, what's really nice is that you can also copy this URL, and you can enter it into the browser, right? Or you can use any client that there are different plugins into Chrome, or you can even use curl, where you can test this. But this, right? This is not running from Opera.io anymore. This is just running from the browser, and I'm accessing the same database, right? But what's really amazing is that how fast I was able to expose the database via this REST API. Okay? All right, let's go back here. Now, so far, right, this API is not really secure. Now, you do need to know the database ID, the API key, but it's still not secured. Now, so let me show you how to secure this API. So if you go to settings, right, you can see that there's an option to which says it's only allow authenticated users to call this API, okay? And I have a security provider here. Let me show you how to create the security provider. I'm going to go to resources. This is, by the way, where you have your certificates for iOS and Android. You can set up webhooks, but today we're going to go to security, and we're going to add a new security provider. So we're going to call this webinar security provider, okay? And now you can see that you have three options here. You can select the Opera IO database, you can select LDAP, or you can use secure LDAP. So actually, let's go ahead and create a database. Actually, let's create a new database. And we'll call this webinar API Express DB. Right, and as you guys probably know, right, there is the user's default collection, and we're going to create the user. So this is where the users need to be located. So we're going to enter, right, and if we want, we can enter Charlie. We'll give Charlie a secure password.
Oh yeah.
Anyhow, password. So this is where you hold your users, okay? And now let's go back here. Let's cancel out so that create again. So this is webinar security provider database, right? So database, and then the one I just created is right here, right? And I can test. Right, and it's successful, and I save. Okay, so I created a security provider. Right, now I have two of them, two security providers listed. Let's go back to API Express. Okay, and right, so these are my APIs. I'm going to go to settings, and notice I clicked here, and I'm going to select the security provider. Now, let's go back and test the APIs, right? And let's see that we actually require a user login. So if I go to test, notice right here, there is a session token. But before I do that, let me just try and run this again. Right? And of course I get an error message because it's missing a session token, right? And the session token, right, that's the value you get when you get a user login. Okay. Now, two ways, right? You can do a login and get the session token and just enter the value here. But even a simpler way is to just click here and enter the username that I created. And it will automatically insert the session token, so there's really nothing for you to do. This is obviously a much simpler way to do it. And if I click test again, now it works. Right? But again, what's nice is that if someone will try to invoke this API, they should get an error. All right. So, right, same thing, same error message now from outside Opera.io or just from the browser. So what we just did is that we first connected to a SQL database. We exposed the database via APIs, and then we also secure the APIs. Okay, as you can see, that everything can be done very, very fast. Okay, now what I want to show you next, let me go back here, is how do you create a custom API? So this is fine where you can automatically generate the stuff. And I think if you're just starting with API Express, you should definitely just automatically generate the stuff and play with it. It's definitely the best way to go. But, you know, you obviously probably going to run into some requirements where you need to customize stuff. And that's why you can create a new service. Click New Service here. And what it's going to do is going to load a really awesome visual flow editor which allows you basically to define a custom service, right? And today we support, and there's a SQL service, SQL component, a REST component, and a fork. We're also going to be supporting, and very soon, a SOAP component, so you can access the SOAP service, and also an if, right? So you can check for a condition, and then based on the condition, you can go one way or the other.
Matt, so these are both for the November 8th. Both of those should be in the November 8th release, this Sunday.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, great.
All right, so this is the input, right, and this is the output. And so the first thing, we're going to use a SQL component. So we dropped the SQL component, but now let's take care of the input. So right here, this is the service, this is the endpoint. So I'm going to say details, and then I'm going to enter a name. So the idea is, let me go show you here. Let me go back for a second. So I would like to enter a name, right? Coffee, for example, and get the details for this item. All right. So that's what I'm trying to do. So this is going to be the endpoint, and then I'm going to enter coffee here, right? This is the parameter. All right. I'm going to click apply, and it creates the parameters. So name, and it's a string. Now I'm going to click on SQL. Okay. And I'm selecting a database connection, and now I'm going to enter the SQL. Okay, and this is just standard SQL. So select all from warehouse where name equals, right? And what you do is you put a column name like this. Okay, when you do that, this means this is a parameter, right? So coffee or whatever other drink I have in the database. Once you have this, what you need to do is you need to click parse SQL. Okay, and it identifies this parameter, and it's actually a string. And right here, what we're going to do, we're going to map it to the path in the URL, to the name in the URL. Okay, so this is what you would like to do. Right. Second is we would like to set up the response. That's why we're going to click generate, and you can see the SQL is here, the SQL parameters are here, and then the response. Here we can enter some sample data, right? We want to do coffee, for example. Run SQL, and you can see we get only the coffee object. So this works fine. And I click OK, and you can see that this is the response on JSON. And we're done. You can click Save. Notice right here, this is where you get the custom service that we just created, and of course you want to be able to test it again as before. We can click test. Notice it is still a secured API, and now here you get the name. Notice this name in the URL, right? So we're going to enter coffee and click test. Oh, I made a mistake, right? Which is good, yes. There is no coffee, right? So hopefully this works better. Right, and we get the response. Okay, so what we did is that we created a custom service, right? You can completely put a custom SQL statement, right? I use a pretty simple one, but again, you're only limited by what you guys sort of need or what the database supports, and you can test it the same way, and now the service is available for you. Let me cancel from here, right? Anyhow, so I think it's incredibly simple to connect to a SQL database and again expose it via REST APIs. We've got just a few minutes. What I'm going to do next is how do you use these APIs, right? Well, of course, one way is you can just click test, right? And you can copy this URL, and you can set up the service and operate your app builder. But there's even a simpler way. So let me go to app, and let me create a new app here. Click create. So again, one way is, of course, you can go to create new and set up a service, right? But again, because everything is integrated, you don't need to do this. You can automatically generate the services by going to create new extension, API Express generator. Okay, and then select the project. This is the project that I just created. Okay, and click generate. You can enter a different name, but this name is fine. Okay, now the only thing is today the services were actually generated, but they're not shown here yet, so you just need to refresh the builder. And we're gonna solve this issue so you can see them right away. And right away, right, you get the services automatically. Now, what's also nice is that these services have built-in offline support. So when you use these services, you will automatically get the offline support as well, so you don't need to do anything.
Okay, that's a critical part of why we kind of combine those two when we talk about them. They actually are, in some ways they're different, but in other ways they're very integrated with each other.
Correct.
In terms of how useful they would be. Okay.
Correct. And I mean, that's pretty much it what I wanted to show you in this session. Again, obviously we wanted to show you how to create APIs, basically on the fly, and test them and secure them. So that was the goal. Okay. Let me quickly switch back here.
Yeah, and I like to point out too that we're trying to give you kind of a taste of the of API Express. We'll do there are lots of follow-up materials, and I'll point out where you can find them later. But first of all, let me point out our next webinar, which because of scheduling things will be happening 1 week from today. It has a slightly different focus. This is all based. One thing you should realize is we really pay attention to what people ask for in webinars. The API Express webinar was a common request that we got from people. And we also got a request for a webinar that would focus on trying to see how a non-coder could use API Express and get some, because a lot of times we assume that you have some kind of knowledge of previous coding experience. So this will be an interesting experiment next week. Same time, same kind of time frame. So this is for the true beginner. So let's see what happens next week. There we go. So here's some information I'm going to throw up here while you type in your questions. Here's how to get in touch with us. My name's Charlie Cowens. I'm more on the marketing and kind of housekeeping side for the webinars. Max, who at Apri.io is Max Katz is the person who's been doing most of the talking now. Many of you are familiar with him. He's the head of developer relations and involved in basically all aspects of Apri.io. So if you have a question about Apri or want to make some suggestions, he's the go-to guy for any of your Apri.io questions or suggestions. When I was talking about other resources about API Express, the place to go is our Dev Center, where we aggregate all of our informational resources for people, so you can just pop there, and if you either find what you need through the navigation or just type in API Express in the search box and find what you need. We also like to encourage people to connect with us through Twitter and Facebook. And of course, I told you about our next upcoming event. If you want to know about all of our future events, we encourage you to either join Plancast and subscribe, or just use this link to go and look. You don't have to be part of a registered user of Plancast to use the events stream that it presents. So there's our link to that, and let's turn to some questions now. There we go. So here's a question from someone. He's asking, how do you implement this in your app? I mean, the next step. Can you use mapping and other stuff like an internal database call? So I guess when you were showing how to use it in an app, you showed how the services were created.
Exactly.
You didn't show the actual mapping, but yeah, it's all there. We just wanted to keep it short and crisp in terms of our presentation.
Absolutely. So yeah, so once you generate the services, right, you just use them the same way. You get the mappings, you can create mappings, you put them on the page. Again, you just use them as any other API service.
Okay.
And that's what's nice about it.
Great. And then this person's asking a kind of a question that's kind of on the edge of the scope, which is, what's the benefit of using the internal database versus using an external database?
Well,
for this kind of API
yeah, I don't
expressor?
think, I mean, the benefit, I mean, it really just depends on the app you're building, right? If you need to use an internal database, internal, I'm assuming you mean the on-device storage, right?
I'm not sure. Maybe I was thinking he meant the Apri.io.
Oh, Apri.io database. Yeah, it's just the Apri.io database is there for you. So absolutely, if it works for you, definitely use it. The SQL, the API Express, usually if you already have existing data within your organization, right, and you would like to use it, that's where API Express is a really good fit.
Oh,
right?
That's a good point. Yeah.
Right? Again, if it's a it's a SQL database, it can be a SOAP service, for example, right? I mean, if you got a SOAP service today, I mean, you can just use it in your app directly without doing a lot of some manual coding. So the SOAP component, although not available today, will be available very soon.
In a few days.
And then you'll be able to expose it via an API and use it in your app. So I guess it just depends on your requirements, if you already have an existing backend or not.
Okay, and in terms of the kind of SQL that you use in setting up things within API Express, are there any limitations on what kind of SQL you can use? This person's asking specifically about inner join merges, which seems like pretty standard.
I don't believe, I mean, you should be able to do an inner join. It's something I would need to confirm. I mean,
there's a specific SQL. Okay, we'll see if there's a specific SQL language version.
Yeah, we can do that.
Like people talk about all these different flavors of regular expressions, so you have to actually say which version you mean. So, I think that's there. So we'll look it up for you. So this person's asking about, back to the question of internal versus external database. Is one faster or more secure, or any other benefits besides the one you mentioned, which was that if you already have existing data, are there any other criteria to use in evaluating using an internal versus an external database with API?
No, I think it's primarily going to come down to, if you have an existing data, right, within your organization, and you need to use it, then API Express is the way to go. If you're starting completely from scratch, then I would say that the cloud database probably would be a good approach to go.
Okay. Here's a question about, you got a database. It's behind a firewall. Can you still use API Express with to publish it? Or
So there are two options. Well, first, there's an option to install API Express on-premise.
Okay.
Right, basically behind the firewall. That's one. Now, if you want to use the cloud version that I just used, right, so you would need to open the API Express so the API Express can make a connection to your database.
Right.
And we understand that in most cases it's not something, probably possible. That's why we have the on-premise or private cloud version available, which provides more security.
Which raises the question of pricing. Now, the pricing for the behind the firewall version is based on there's no. I mean, we don't have an actual rate schedule, but for the cloud price, it's just part of backend services, right?
Correct. For the on-premise or the private cloud, it's very custom because so just contact us. That's the best way.
But then for the pricing for the
public.
Yeah, for the regular.
Yeah, it's all on the website.
So it's just in that pricing page. So it's
correct.
Okay. So so that's about it. If there are no other questions, I think I'm going to wrap it up because, as I was saying earlier on, we're trying to keep these things short and sweet so people can go back to their day. But I'm willing to answer one last question. So is it true that and this is really the last question because we're up against the end here. Is it true that updates to the databases are not seen directly by the users? Sometimes it is refreshed within an hour and other ones are updated within a day. How is this with API Express? So this person, I guess, is asking about how the transaction processing...
Well, so I'm not sure which database is referred to in the first part of the question. Again, if you're using the Apri.io database, and I'm referring to the first part of the question, then the update should be there instantly. for the Apereo database.
So with external databases, if they have some kind of batching process, then it's it'll just work with that. There's no special issue.
But even for API Express, I mean, if you connect to a SQL database, you should see a change immediately. So if you do an update or an insert, you should see that data right away.
Okay.
So again,
any last words, Max?
Well, just going back to this again, if you maybe send us which database you used, again, which is maybe refreshed every hour. I mean, it's possible, but again, when you use our database, then everything is done instantly.